It's good to be here. Thank you for having me again. We've talked about brainstorming. We talked about kind of the first structure of how to write an essay, which was the narrative structure. And today we're going to be talking about the montage structure, what that looks like, and how you can incorporate that into your essay writing. All right, so as an overview of what we're going to talk about, we're going to have a brief review. We're going to go over what montage structure looks like, and then look at two essay formats that uses the montage structure. So if you'll remember, last time we asked ourselves two questions. Do you have a significant challenge you want to write an essay on? And do you know what you want to study? If you don't know or if you have a significant challenge, you'll be an A or C essay writer. And then you'll use a narrative structure because you have a challenge that you want to lay out and tell a story. If you don't have a significant challenge, then you'll be an B or D essay student. And you'll likely write a montage essay or a montage structured essay. Now, again, a narrative structure is linked through cause and effect. So one thing leads to another thing, which leads to another thing. Now, a montage structure, on the other hand, are events that are related in some thematic way, but they don't necessarily have to be a cause and effect relationship. Thus, you can tell a story from when you were 5 years old, and then you can tell a story from when you were 21 years old. So there's a way to connect these events together that might otherwise be disparate events into a unified whole by connecting them through some connective tissue, likely a theme in your essay. Right, so again, there are fragments that are combined into a coherent whole. And here it's important to point out that in a montage structured essay, the essay does not have to be chronological. And this is an important part of a montage structure. Now, oftentimes it is chronological simply because it's far easier to tell a story and write an essay in chronological order, but it by no means has to be in chronological order. Oftentimes, in addition to being combined with a theme, so an overall theme of your essay, a connecting lens combines the essay. And a connecting lens can be different things. It can be an essence object. It can be a place, an art form, a hobby, or anything else that's concrete that can help the reader visualize what in fact you are saying. Because as we've talked about before with the narrative structure, you're still telling a story in a montage structure, but you're doing it in a different way than a chronological cause and effect relationship between all of the events in your story. And remember, storytelling is a visual art form. Even when you're writing, there are ways to make what you are writing a visual experience for your reader. And that's where the focusing lens comes in, and we'll talk about what that might look like in an essay. All right, so let's look at what a montage looks like. So this is a montage from Rocky, the movie. This, at least in America, this is probably one of the most famous movie montages of all time. Everybody knows this song. In essence, Rocky is about an up-and-coming boxer who is working his way up the ranks, and I think right now he's training for his big fight. And so this montage is all about him training for his big fight. What we'll do is we'll watch the montage once, and then I'll go over some of the elements that we can see from the montage structure here and how it operates to kind of convey a story and convey characterization about who Rocky is. All right, so now that we've seen the montage, we can look at some of the elements in the montage. And again, what I'll remind you of is that storytelling is a visual element. So even when, of course, you have the background music that's saying trying hard now, right? So again, that's kind of setting the scene for what he's doing. But really, there's only like one set of dialogue in this entire montage. And all of the rest is just visual storytelling of what is going on. The montage starts with him being at a railroad place with bricks in his hand, fist pumping the air. Like, why is he using what? Why is he using bricks and not weights? Why is he at where railroads are? It's just to show that he's gritty, that he's someone who doesn't have all this fancy equipment that his opponent might have. So it's again illustrating who he is as a person and his work ethic. And then of course the next scene is him going through the marketplace, and you see all these people looking at him, smiling, saying hello. Like the one guy gives him maybe like a fruit or something along those lines, right? So again, it shows that he's hardworking, but that he's also a man of the people. So he's not an elitist. He's not up in the clouds. He's somebody who's kind of working his way up the ranks and is with the people from where he started from. And then we can see throughout the rest of it that we see this art of visual storytelling. We can look at that in the scene where he's beating up on this like big thing of meat, right? Like, why is he doing that? I mean, he likely has a punching bag. So there's no necessarily like logical reason why you should be punching a thing of meat rather than a punching bag, right? But it's a visual way to kind of get across the character of Rocky in the movie, which is this rough guy, right? But then the next thing you can see throughout the montage that he's running or jogging, often slowly, but you'll see that he's kind of speeding up as the montage goes on. And so this is probably comes to a head when he starts sprinting next to that boat, right? And that's showing his progress as a boxer through the montage, where he's getting ready for the fight with Apollo Creed. And he's ready by the end of the montage. And we can see that through his, ascending the stairs and, throwing his arms up in the air, in Philadelphia, right? So we can see how these visual elements of storytelling, although the events themselves are very disparate, right? They're not necessarily linked in any kind of narrative, chronological cause and effect way. They are linked through the theme, which is the theme that Rocky is getting ready for his fight with Apollo Creed, right? So again, we can see these different elements. All right, so now we can go back to writing your essay, right? So as we discussed, if you don't have a specific challenge you want to discuss in your essay, then you're likely going to be a type B or type D essay writer. First, if you're a type B, what we're going to do is we're going to connect events in your life to the key values or qualities of a specific career that you want to go into, or into the area of study that you want to go into. And we'll go more in depth with this, so don't worry if you don't grasp this with just this brief explanation. I'll give you a brief explanation, and then we'll get into it more specifically. Type D, on the other hand, is going to be a lot more open-ended than type B, because we don't have a specific career to connect it to, and we don't have a specific challenge to talk about. A big part of D is just going to be figuring out what exactly we are going to be talking about. And so we're going to connect different events from your life in some way to something important to you. And again, that's very, very broad. Don't worry if you don't get that right now. Again, we'll discuss that more in depth later. But just remember that type D is going to be a lot more open-ended, because we don't have something to kind of work off of, which is either a career, a challenge, or both, right? So what does a type B look like? How do we connect the dots? The key to writing and really outlining a type B essay, and again, outlining is very, very important to your essay. As I talked about last time, outlining is going to set you up for success in the same way that brainstorming is going to set you up for success. So I would not start an essay without doing some kind of outlining of your essay. But with that in mind, again, the key to a type B essay is working backwards. And so here we'll start with the middle section of our table. On the left, we have how I've developed these qualities, the essential values of a specific career, and then the insights, the so what. And I'll get more in depth into what this looks like. And we'll have some time at the end of the session to kind of do some of this brainstorming, some of this outlining on your own, and then ask questions if you have any, questions. So if you have this 3-column, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start with your middle column. Right, so what is your desired career? Let's say my desired career is being an engineer, right? So I want to be an engineer. I'm going to ask the question, what are the essential values or qualities of an engineer? So I would say an engineer has to be resourceful. An engineer has to be creative because, right, they have to create these amazing structures or this amazing technology. They also have to be good at collaboration, right? So, you know, an engineer does not build a building alone or build a bridge alone. He has a team that who he works with. So again, they have to be resourceful, creative, good at collaboration. Once I have these essential values of this engineer, I'm going to look back at my life and say, when was a time when I embodied these elements of an engineer? So here are some examples from my own life that we could see, okay, here's how I embodied these elements. So let's first look at resourceful. When I was in high school, I used to work at an after-school program, and there I would tutor students from the ages of 7 years old to all the way to 18 years old. So it was a very intense experience. You know, one day you would come in, there'd be a girl crying because she couldn't figure out, you know, 3 times 3, but then you would have, you know, the next day or the same day, you know, high school students who just hated pre-calculus, and you're like, all right, how do we get this person motivated to kind of get involved in their studies, but also how do I make sure that I kind of teach them along the way? And oftentimes, you know, there would be students who had a very hard time reading, and they had reading homework. And so how do you do that in a way that is both productive for them, doesn't waste your time and their time, but also in a way that makes sure that they learn how to read, right? So my experience at the Boys and Girls Club required me to be resourceful in my experience with and in my interaction with these students. And then we can also see my creativity in my experience in advanced choir. So when I was in high school, my senior year, I was also in advanced choir. Now, I was never somebody who could, you know, could go out all alone and sing some kind of solo, but I could hold a note, especially if I was, you know, with a group, and I did all right. But for our senior year, we had to do a senior concert, which was basically every senior had to go up and sing a song. So I'm like, well, I'm not good at really singing songs. And so I was like, okay, how can I make the best of this and not make a fool of myself? And my solution was to rap a song. And I rapped this kind of meme song. You may or may not have heard of it, but it's called Pants on the Ground. It's like a funny meme song that was like on American Idol. And so I ended up rapping that song with one of my good friends at the time. And it was a way for me to, you know, make an experience or do a performance that was enjoyable for me and the audience, but that was also didn't make a fool of myself in a way that was a negative way, right? There's a different way to kind of characterize those two things. But that was a way to be creative given the circumstances that I was in, that I had to do a song and that I wasn't that great at, you know, singing solo or doing something along those lines. But next, let's look at good at collaboration. So I would say that one of the areas where I can illustrate that I was good at collaboration was my speech and debate experience. Again, as I've discussed throughout, you know, these sessions, speech and debate is a very collaborative process because we come together, we have these arguments that we have to prep out together and then figure out what we're going to say, when we're going to say it. And what's interesting is that it's both a collaborative process, but also an individual process, because we have to figure out collectively, okay, here are some good arguments to make, but then individually we have to decide what are the arguments that I want to make from those arguments. So it's both a collaborative, but also more of an individual process as well. So once you've got these two columns filled out, again, starting from your career, working backwards to the values or to the events that embody the values of that specific career, we can then move on to insights. And insights can simply be characterized as so what moments. Like, why is this important? What did you learn? Why is this something that matters? And the important thing about insights is that oftentimes you won't really be able to outline an insight, because oftentimes insights come out as you're writing. You're like, oh, this I did learn this, and this is how it applies to my essay. So don't get too bogged down in saying, I really don't, I can't think of an insight off the top of my head. That's likely going to be the experience of most, if not many people. But here's what an insight look like. An insight is simply, again, just a so what did you learn? Why is this important to your overall essay? Or why is this important to you? So for example, right, so we can look at some of the insights that I could have written down for these different experiences. Resourceful, right? So I've got resourceful, and I've got experience at my Boys and Girls Club. Well, my insight is that tutoring requires rolling with the punches, not just knowledge, right? So as a tutor, you can't just simply, you're not going to be a good tutor if you only have the knowledge that a tutor requires. You also have to have the skills to be able to deal with different kinds of people, different kinds of scenarios, adjusting yourself to their needs, right? And so that is what a good tutor requires. Creative. And again, that goes back to my experience in advanced choir. So what is the insight? And my insight was that restrictions can set you up for creative success, right? I had the restrictions that were, I can't really sing all that well alone, but I also have to perform some kind of song. And so that set me up for a creative success in which I was able to perform a song, rap a song that I had fun with, and that I think I made the crowd laugh with me, hopefully, right? And then good at collaboration. Again, pointing back to my experience in speech and debate, crafting arguments. And so my insight in this section would be collaboration can lead to inefficiency while still being a winning strategy. Oftentimes during debate, when we would be prepping out arguments, there would be, again, we would be researching on our own and kind of bringing up these arguments to the group. There would be time where people would bring up points that was completely irrelevant, or there would be times when people brought up points that we had talked about, 2 minutes ago, and they were just bringing it back up. And so we'd be like, no, we've already gone over this. This is what we're saying. And so all of these, when you have 15 minutes to prep out an entire argument, an entire case, these smaller things do kind of add up and can lead to a significant amount of inefficiency. However, even with this inefficiency, it can still be a winning strategy. And so that might be an interesting insight into just how collaboration works, the problems with it, but overall how important it is to success overall. So here we can see again how we started with a career, the values of that career. We went to the events in your life where you embodied those values. And then we talked about what you learned from those experiences. And these are tied to your experience during those events. An important point here, and we'll see this later as we look at some examples, we'll see that sometimes the insights don't have a direct relation to your career, but oftentimes they do, or at least they illustrate something about your thought process, how you were processing these experiences, how you were dealing with them. And that shows who you are. And that's, again, a very valuable part, and if not the most important part of writing an essay, is illustrating how you think, how you thought through an event, how you dealt with an experience. All right, so here are some things to remember as you're writing and planning out a type B essay. Your examples and events the connection to your career should not be completely obvious to your reader. So for example, here's an example that Ethan Sawyer gives in his book. Let's say in your essay, your examples are your father is a doctor, and the value that this embodies is family. You really value family. The next example you give is that, is that anatomy is your favorite class, and the value you embody through this example is knowledge. Then the next example you give is that you volunteered at a local hospital, and the value here is helping others. the career that you give to your reader should not be a doctor, because the connection there is just so obvious that it, again, an essay like this might work if you do it in a very interesting way, and it can absolutely be done. But you should really rethink some of these very obvious connections, because what that's going to lead to is an uninteresting essay. Because if you go into an essay knowing exactly what the outcome is going to be, it can be kind of boring. And we kind of talked about this last time with a type A and C essay, is that you want to make sure that you clearly distinguish between your challenge, your solution, and what you learn. Because if you conflate those all into one, or if you give your solution at the beginning of your essay, there's nothing left to kind of discover for your reader. And think of a type B and at least a type B essay as the reader is trying to discover what your career is. And so don't give that away at the beginning of the essay, because it's going to have the same effect as giving away your solution or what you did at the beginning of your type A or C essay. Now, next up, let's talk about values. Try to think of unpredictable values for your career. A good way to kind of conceptualize this, visualize this, and put this into practice is to say, you're telling me your career. Try to find a value that would surprise me if you were to tell me that value was linked to that career. Now, it's important to say that there are things that you should probably put in the box of an engineer, right? There are certain things that, are obvious and for good reason. And so you might want to include those, but also make sure that you have some unpredictable values that are linked to your specific career. Now, with regards to the actual layout of the essay, the way you should lay out a type B essay is to spend the first 2/3 or 3/4 of your essay using your images, using your essence objects, using details, illustrating these examples and how they link to these values. So again, this is all about showing. This is all about showing. In the last 1/3 of your essay to the last 1/4 of your essay is all about telling your reader how these showing images or how these examples link to your specific career. Again, if you're like, how does that look like? Well, we're going to get into an example so that we can see what that looks like. So as I mentioned before, or as I did last session, I will read this aloud just so we're all on the same page. But if you would like to read it to yourself, feel free to mute me and read it. But I'll go ahead and read it so we're all on the same page. So this is endodontics. Again, this is a type B essay. As a kid, I was always curious. I was unafraid to ask questions and didn't worry how dumb they would make me sound. In 2nd grade, I enrolled in a summer science program and built a solar-powered oven that baked real cookies. I remember obsessing over the smallest details. Should I paint the oven black to absorb more heat? What about its shape? A spherical shape would allow for more volume, but would it trap the heat as well as a conventional rectangular oven? Even then, I was obsessed with the details of design, and it didn't stop in 2nd grade. A few years later, I designed my first pair of shoes, working for hours to perfect every detail, including whether the laces should be mineral white or diamond white. Even then, I sensed that minor differences in tonality could make a huge impact, and that different colors could evoke different responses. In high school, I moved on to more advanced projects, teaching myself to take apart, repair, and customize cell phones. Whether I was adjusting the flex cords that connect the IPS LCD to the iPhone motherboard or replacing the vibrator motor, I love discovering the many engineering feats Apple overcame in its efforts to combine form with function. And once I obtained my driver's license, I began working on cars. Many nights you'll find me in the garage replacing standard chrome trim with an elegant piano black finish or changing the threads on the stitching of the seats to add a personal touch, as I believe a few small changes can transform a generic product into a personalized work of art. My love of details applies to my schoolwork too. I'm the math geek who marvels at the fundamental theorems of calculus or who sees beauty in this equation. Again, it's in the details. One bracket off or one digit missing, and the whole equation collapses. The details are more than details. It can mean the difference between negative and positive infinity and impossible range of solutions. I also love sharing this appreciation with others, and I've taken it upon myself to personally eradicate mathunomophobia confundosis. I had to practice that a few times before the session. My calculus teacher term for extreme fear of math. A small group of other students and I have devoted our after-school time to tutoring our peers in everything from pre-algebra to AP calculus. And I believe my fluency in Hebrew and Farsi has helped me connect with some of my school's Israeli and Iranian students. There's nothing better than seeing a student solve a difficult problem without me saying anything. You probably think I want to be a designer or perhaps an engineer. Wrong? Well, kind of. Actually, I want to study endodontics, which is, I'll save you the Wikipedia lookup, a branch of dentistry that deals with the tooth pulp and the tissue surrounding the root of a tooth. As an endodontist, I'll be working to repair damaged teeth by performing precision root canals and implementing dental crowns. Sound exciting? It is to me. The fact is, it's not unlike the work I've been doing repairing cell phone circuits and modifying cars. But there is one small difference. In the future, I'll still be working to repair machines. But this machine is one of the most sophisticated machines ever created, the human body. Here, my obsession with details will be as crucial as ever. A 1 millimeter difference can mean the difference between a successful root canal and a lawsuit. The question is, will the toothbrushes I hand out be mineral white or diamond white? All right, now that we've read this, let's look at what this looks like. So let's start, just like we were prepping out or outlining a type B essay, let's start with the middle of our diagram here. So what are the essential values of a dentist? Now, he doesn't go out and say a dentist is detail-oriented, is curious, and likes helping others. But we realize that these are the essential qualities of a dentist because he ends up talking about becoming a dentist. So in his essay, when he begins his first paragraph with, "Even then, I was obsessed with the details of design," you know he's going to end up at a career that is going to be focused on the details. When he talks about Apple's overcoming its efforts to combine form and function, you know he's going to be looking at the design of the things that he's going to be doing as a career. As he talks about how he worked on his cars, you know he's going to be somebody who's curious, who wants to play with different kinds of things in different kinds of ways. And so you know that that is where he's going to end up. Now, you don't know that he's going to end up at an endodontist, importantly. You know, when he says, he even addresses it, like, you probably think that I'm going to become a designer or an engineer. He actually wants to become an endodontist, right? So there's an unpredictable element in where he ends up. But in returning to the essential values of a dentist, so let's look at these, and then let's look at the examples that he gives in order to bring across these essential values. So detail-oriented and curiosity. He kind of brings this up towards the beginning part of the essay, where he discusses, as a kid, I was always curious. And he gives this concrete example, which is an important part to kind of root your essay in this concrete example, about how in the second grade, he enrolled in a summer science program and built a solar-powered oven that baked real cookies. But then he went into his thought process during this time, right? So he's just obsessing about the color, its shape, how it would absorb heat, how that compared to other kinds of designs. All of this illustrates his kind of predisposition to be looking at the details of design, to be curious about what is going to be going on in the design process and in the final product. But he also illustrates that he enjoys helping others. I mean, this one's a pretty obvious example where he talks about how he would tutor individuals in math. So again, illustrating concrete examples with all of these values. And he does go into a significant, I mean, not too much detail, but he makes sure to elaborate on his own unique thought process with each of these students. So for example, some of these are kind of, right, so a lot of high school students have tutored other students in specific areas. And so simply saying, I've always wanted to help people is not one way, seems kind of mundane in some way, right? Because it's like, okay, well, everybody who's tutored is going to say that, right? But this author goes about it in a different way, right? Because he says to personally eradicate this kind of what his calculus teacher terms extreme fear of math, right? So he does this in an interesting way, something that sets him apart from the other essays that these essay readers might be reading during this term. So we've gone over the essential values of a dentist, how he developed these values, or how he can illustrate these values in his own life. What are the insights that he had throughout his essay? Well, one of the insights comes with his example of Apple, right? So he talks about here, and I'm pointing to the second from the bottom paragraph. He said, "I love discovering the many engineering feats Apple overcame in its efforts to combine form with function." And here he seems to bring the two ideas of detail-oriented and curiosity together to show how they both are useful, how they play off of one another, and what this looks like in the real world. An interesting insight. But we can also see that he's made some other insights as well, which is that he talks about how it's important to teach others to learn and do things on their own, right? So at the bottom paragraph, bottom sentence, he says, "There's nothing better than seeing a student solve a difficult problem without me saying anything." That's, that's as a tutor, that's clearly what you are working towards in any kind of mentorship capacity. But what's important here is that this insight really has very little to do with his work as a dentist, right? Because as a dentist, especially with his specialized field that he is going to be going into, he's likely not going to be seeing the same people every day, doing root canals on the same people every day, at least hopefully. And so what that means is that he's going to have a very limited ability to kind of convince individuals to maintain their oral hygiene, make sure they're brushing their teeth, make sure they're flossing. And so this insight doesn't directly apply to his future career of being an endodontist. But what it does do is it illustrates his thought process as he was helping other people. And that in and of itself is a valuable thing to get across to a reader of your essay. And so don't feel as though each insight that you give has to be directly tied to your career or towards your end goal. All right, now that we've gone over this, again, we'll have some time at the end of the session to do some outlining for yourself. But next, let's go into a type D essay. And remember that a type D essay is going to be a lot more open-ended than a type B essay. Simply because, again, like I said, there's nothing to kind of work off of. You're going to have to figure out what you're going to talk about. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to connect all of these different things together. And so what you're going to talk about, your content, is going to be simply just the values or qualities that you want to illustrate about yourself. And the structure is simply an angle or a way to frame these values and qualities or unify these values and qualities into a coherent whole. And so the key to doing this is, first off, patience. You're going to have to look at a lot of different ideas, weed out these ideas, and figure out what works for you, because they're not all going to work for you. But the second key is find a focusing lens. Find some framing device that you can use in order to kind of organize your essay. And we'll go over some examples of what that looks like. And then, of course, an essay example to see how this framing lens can be used to really connect these different ideas, these different values together into a coherent whole. All right, so as I talked about, at the first session, brainstorming is important, and it is in fact important. And so as we go through these exercises, as we go through um, how to find a framing lens, a good way to do that is going to be looking at your brainstorming exercises, seeing what pops out to you. Is there an essence object that pops up multiple times in your brainstorming exercises? Is there a place that pops up multiple times? Is there a career? Find these things that you can find throughout your life in order to kind of connect all of these dots for your reader. So a first concrete strategy you can do is simply to use a placeholder career for your essay. And basically what this means is that you'd essentially be writing a type B essay where you're kind of unifying your framing lens in some sense is your specific career that you want to go into. And for this kind of a format, it's simply picking a career that you could see yourself in or that you are interested in. So for example, let's say during my application process when I was when I was in high school, of course, I didn't have any kind of resource like this. And so it was very much me trying to figure it out as I went along. And so definitely use these resources because these are going to set you up for success. And I cannot stress that enough. But I remember there were many essays that I wrote where I would discuss um, this is the career that I would potentially want to go into. And so I used this kind of a format where I said, I don't know what career I'm going to go into, but I can use it as a placeholder in order for me to get the idea of my essay across. And I forget even what those careers were at this point. But I remember using this specific strategy in order to write my essays. Now, this first option is useful, and because it can help you find a career. Consciously thinking through what are the qualities of a person in this career? Do I have those qualities? How do I illustrate those qualities? Can really bring out to you whether or not you fit this career or whether or not you would like to be in this specific career. So this is an exercise, a way to figure out where you want to be. And as we have discussed through brainstorming and outlining, conscious reflection on your own experiences, on your own attitudes, on your own thoughts is not only going to set you up for success with your essay writing, but it is going to give you insight into who you are as a person. But the thing you should remember here too is that oftentimes the careers that we put down or that we say to our friends and family that, oh, I'm going to be, this when I grow up. Those are often placeholder careers. And you know, maybe you're listening to this and you say, I know what I'm going to be, and that's great and that's completely fine. But I know for at least in America, I don't know the exact statistics, but there are a significant number of students who go into college with a specific major and change their major at some point during their college career. So oftentimes what does happen is that the career that you're thinking that you're going to do may not be the career that you end up doing. Now that may be a minority of you, but oftentimes careers that we kind of aspire to are in and of themselves placeholder careers. But maybe one of the most important aspects or one of the biggest benefits of this type of strategy to finding a framing lens is that it saves you so much time. You're not having to dissect every part of your brainstorming exercises, spend hours of conscious reflection looking at what are some key elements that you can bring together. And that's a valuable tool, especially in making sure that you are motivated to write your essay and that you get your essay done. So I would definitely recommend simply just finding a placeholder career. But the next thing you can do is you can simply find a common theme that kind of goes throughout your brainstorming exercises or through your life. So as you're doing some conscious reflection on your life, let's say the theme of home keeps popping up throughout it. So one thing you could do is you could write an essay exploring your relationship to your home. What does that look like? What is your home? How has your idea of home evolved? What does that mean to you? And then of course you give values of maybe what a home is, and then you would explain through experiences what that means to you. But let's say, one thing that pops up as you're doing your conscious reflection is that you've always wanted to be a good student. Well, it might be an interesting essay to discuss how has the idea of being a good student evolved in your own mind. Maybe you began your journey as a student believing that being a good student is all about making straight A's or doing these specific things. But as you've evolved, and as you've grown as a person, that idea itself has grown and evolved. And again, you might be thinking, well, these are somewhat mundane, and they can be if you make them mundane, right? There are interesting ways to approach these kinds of essays, which will allow you to write an interesting essay that will really hook a reader's attention. The next strategy you can do is you can also look for contradictions within your own life. So for example, let's say you have a passion for collaboration, but you're also strongly independent. Well, that's in some sense, that's a contradiction within your own nature. And so you could use your essay as a way to talk about maybe the internal struggle that you have, or how you reconcile those two things in your own life. What does that look for you? What does that struggle look like for you? And so that could be an interesting essay. But one thing you could also write about is your experience with different cultures that you are exposed to. And so for me, what this would look like is, you may or may not remember from my first session on brainstorming, I'm a Hungarian, Romanian American. So my dad is Hungarian, my mom is Romanian. I'm a first generation American. And so an interesting essay topic for me might be that I talk about what it was like growing up in a Hungarian Romanian household, and kind of dealing with the different cultural customs that come along with that, along with the different cultural customs that come along with just being American. And, if you were at my brainstorming session, right, you saw how there's a specific fruit soup, a, Hungarian/Romanian fruit soup that, I personally love, but I know none of my American friends would ever enjoy, right? Because it's just not to their palate. Or I could talk about an interesting way to introduce the idea is that for in Hungarian and Romanian cultures, oftentimes you'll greet people by kissing them on both cheeks. You wouldn't do that to an American friend, right? That would be very, very strange. And although those are more mundane examples of how you can navigate different cultures, they might be interesting ideas to introduce this broader theme of trying to navigate who you are with regards to these two different cultures. That could be a very interesting essay topic as well. All right, so the next thing is simply listing your top 3 to 5 life lessons. I could list a few events in my life where I remember realizing something that has kind of hit me ever since, and that has shaped me as a person. So what are those lessons for you? What does that look like for you? Now, the important thing here is that these lessons should not seem, there should still be some kind of connection with these lessons. And the connection should be who you are as a person. So here's an example. Let's say one of the big life lessons that you learned was when you were maybe in like the first grade, second grade or whatever, and you were picking out your clothes for the first time. That was the first time where you were kind of given the ability to kind of navigate the way you dealt with the outside world. You had to pick what clothes worked for you, how you would be, looked at by other people. And so that was a very formative experience because it gave you agency over how you dealt with other people around you. But let's say that you were bullied, or that you saw other people bullied, and you didn't do anything about it. And let's say that as you grew older, you realized that advocacy is an important part of your life, and that you really value that to help other people. And so that might be something else, another life lesson that you learn. Let's say that you got a dog and you were training your dog, and you learn that a dog requires for you to, when you're training it, to be assertive, but also make sure that you are able to play with the constraints of your dog. Every dog has a personality. How you train it is going to differ based on that personality. And so what this shows you is maybe how to be a good leader, and you've put this into practice in other areas of your life, let's say. And so these three lessons, this idea of navigating the social realm, and maybe you're a perfectionist when you do that. So this idea of perfectionism, this idea of advocacy, and this idea of leadership, although these are very different lessons, very different events, could all point to who you are as a person. And maybe you would describe yourself, or maybe a significant part of who you are is a perfectionist advocate who wants to be a leader. So here we can see how these different lessons combine together or point towards who you are as a person. And that's a very good way to link all of these ideas, all of these lessons together. Right? And finally, the last strategy you can do is simply write about something that you love to do. Two examples could be beekeeping or reading. Now, the important point here is, again, you want to make sure that your essay is interesting. So the way you do that, if you use this kind of a framing lens, is either find a very interesting passion or something that you love, or talk about a passion that might be kind of common to a lot of people in a very interesting way. And that could be something that you can use to make your essay interesting, because reading in and of itself is not a very unique passion. I think probably everybody would say they love to read, although most people probably don't, right? They say that because that's something that's like, the textbook answer, right? So if you're going to talk about reading, realize that that is going to be something that is going to be maybe less interesting to begin with. So you're going to have to take a very interesting and a very creative approach in addressing that as something you love. And Ethan Sawyer gives an example of somebody doing just that, taking reading and then working with it in a very creative way. So it can be done, but it is going to be hard. It is going to require very long, conscious thought, revisions, playing with ideas, looking at how they evolve. So it can be done, but again, some of these are going to be harder than others. All right, so now again, let's look at an example. Again, feel free to mute me if you would like to continue to read ahead, but I will read it aloud for the benefit of everybody. And this is Scrapbook, again, a type D essay. I look at the ticking white clock. It's 11 at night, my prime time. I clear the carpet of the Sony camera charger, the faded Levi's, and the last week's statistics homework. Having prepared my workspace, I pull out two 12 by 12 cream sheets and reproduce sketches of the layouts already imprinted in my head. Now I can really begin. I leave a 1/4-inch border as I cut the first paragraph, which I then adhere to a polka-dotted paper. For a sophisticated touch, I use a needle and thread to sew the papers together. Loads of snipping and pasting later, the clock reads 3 in the morning. I glance down at the final product and feel an overwhelming sense of pride as I brush my fingers over the many layers and pages. For me, the act of taking pieces of my life and putting them together on a page is my way of organizing remnants of my past to make something whole and complete. This particular project is the most valuable one to date, the scrapbook of my life. In the center of the first page are the words, "My World," in periwinkle letters. All 4 of my Korean grandparents sit in the top corner, looking over my first birthday, my doll. Underneath them are my cousins trying to not let go of their overwhelming laughter while playing red light, green light at old Melvini Park. Meanwhile, my Texas relatives watch Daniel, the youngest, throw autumn leaves into the air that someone spent hours raking up. To the right, my friends miserably pose for our history teacher who documents our droopy faces the morning of our first AP exam. The largest photograph is that of my family huddled in front of the fireplace, drinking my brother's hot cocoa and listening to the pitter-patter of sporadic Los Angeles rain. I move over to the right side of the page. At the top, I have delicately sewn on 3 items. The first is a page of a Bible that was given to the soldiers at a Cambodia base where I taught English. Beneath is the picture of my group of Guatemalan girls devouring arroz con pollo. Red sauce slobbered all over our lips. I reread the third item, a short note that a student of mine from a rural Korean school had struggled to write in her broken English. Moving down the page, I see the shelf display of my vibrantly glazed ceramic projects. I have included a clipping of my page from the school newspaper, next to ticket stubs for Wicked from my date with Dad. I made sure to incorporate a snapshot of my first scrapbook page featuring a visit to Hearst Castle on my 10th birthday. After proudly looking over each detail, I turn to the next page, which I've labeled "And Beyond." This page is not cluttered or crowded. There is my college diploma with international relations listed and the school's name left blank. A map covers nearly half the page with stickers pinpointing locations all over the world, but I cannot recognize the countries' names. The remainder of the page is a series of frames with captions underneath. Without the photographs, descriptions are cryptic. For now, that second page remains incomplete because I have no precise itinerary for my future. The red flags on the map represent the places I will travel to, possibly to teach English or to partner with a charity again. As for the empty frames, they will be filled with the people I will meet, a family of my own and the families I desire to help, through a career I have yet to adopt. Until these things unfold, all I can do is prepare. I'll continue to finalize the layout and gather materials so that I can start piecing together the next part, the next page of my life's scrapbook. All right, let's look at these ideas and what and oh yeah, uh, these ideas and how she kind of translated these into an essay, right? So again, let's start with the middle. Now, you'll remember that with a type B essay, the middle was basically your career, right? Because that was your end goal. That was the unifying thread throughout the entire essay. And so a good way to kind of figure out what you're going to write, how you're going to write it with a type D essay is use the middle section, is to think of it as the unifying thread throughout your entire essay. And in this essay, the unifying thread is the scrapbook that she is making and that she is kind of talking about throughout her essay. Now, the important part here is that it's not just that she is giving, you know, this, like, what is a scrapbook? Well, this is what it is, right? She's looking throughout her essay. We can see these different values being kind of embodied, and we'll look at these more specifically here in just one moment. But we have family, adventure, diversity. All of those are values that you can see throughout her essay, even though she doesn't come out and say, I really value my family. I am an adventurous person. I value diversity. She never comes out and says that, but we can see all these aspects in her essay. So let's begin with family. We can see family in this part of her essay here. This paragraph where it begins, last paragraph on this slide, where it begins with in the center of the first page. And she talks about her Korean grandparents, her cousins, her relatives in Texas, even her friends, right? So friends and family, this idea of community. All of this is embodied in this picture or in this paragraph, although she never comes out and says, I value community. And an interesting way she conveys that, and this is very, very important, an interesting way she conveys that is through her essence objects. So when she talks about her Korean grandparents, she talks about my doll. And I think that's a specific like cultural thing that I'm not familiar with. But something that we might be more familiar with is the game red light, green light that they are playing, that her cousins are playing, where basically there's a person who stands maybe at the end of, you know, a room, and then, you know, green light, they turn around and, you know, people are like walking up, they say red light, they turn around, and if they see you moving, then you're out of the game. Right? So red light, green light. And then she also talks about autumn leaves, or one of her relatives throwing up autumn leaves. She talks about the photograph that her history teacher took of them during the morning of their first AP exam. All of these are essence objects. And because she goes into these concrete details of what these essence objects are, it conveys the values that she is trying to convey implicitly. Now, somebody asked in a different session about, do we have to go into this much detail with our examples? And one thing that I will point out is that, yes, to some extent, she goes into a lot of detail, but if you really look at the essay, it's really not all that detailed, right? So she spends a sentence on each one of these people, right? Her Korean grandparents, they get a sentence. Her cousins, they get a sentence. Her Texas relatives, they get a sentence. AP exam, they get a sentence. Los Angeles rain, that one picture, that gets a sentence. So these aren't very detailed explanations of the events, but it has the appearance of detail because what is she doing? She's using those essence objects to convey, to help you visualize what is going on in the story. And again, that makes for good storytelling when you can visualize what is going on. With that comment, let's look at adventure, right? So again, it's not that she conveys it and she says, I'm an adventurous person. She conveys that through the story she tells with her examples, right? So she talks about the Cambodia base where she went and the Bible that was given to these soldiers. She taught English in Cambodia. That's really, really interesting. That's adventurous. We can also see the value of diversity, right? So we can see this through really throughout her whole essay, but maybe in this paragraph where she went to Cambodia, she went to Guatemala and was enjoying time with these people from a different background, right? And so this might be an interesting way in order to show that she values diversity, that is an important part of who she is. And again, what you could do is you could dissect all of these paragraphs and say, well, there are really 5 to 10 values, or somewhere maybe less, maybe 1 to 5 values that each of these paragraphs embodies. And again, you could really pick these paragraphs apart to really get to a lot of what she's talking about. But again, she doesn't do that on the nose, right? She doesn't come out and say, I value X, Y, and Z, and here's an example. She gives the example in this case and kind of explain, and it's kind of implicit what that value is. Now, of course, that won't fit every essay because sometimes you need to make clear what your values are, and that's completely fine. But next, let's look at her insights, or really her insight, because as we, in contrast to the last essay or to the example that I gave in my type B or type B essay example that I was, evaluating myself through, there were multiple insights throughout those essays and throughout that example that I give. But, through this, maybe you could pick out some different insights that she makes implicitly, but really the big insight or the big so what moment that that the reader comes away with, she kind of elaborates in the last section of her essay where she says, now that I've talked about where I've been, what I've done, now I need to look to where I will be, what I want to do, how my life will evolve. And, a great line in this essay, I think, is the third sentence in this second paragraph. There's my college diploma with international relations listed and the school's name left blank. All right. So this idea of she knows what she may know her essay, again, doesn't know her career, but she's connecting it to the specific university and says, I know what I want to do, or I know this thing that I want to do or that I'm about, but I don't know where I'm going to do it. And so the so what moment is basically for the reader to say, oh, I want my school's university to be where she goes. I want her to study international relations at this university. I want to put my school's name into her diploma, right? So that's the so what moment. Why does this entire story matter? It matters because the university can be that and beyond part of her scrapbook. Right, so we can see all of these different elements. And I'll repeat it one more time, is that the type D essay focuses, what's crucial is finding that framing or focusing lens. In this essay, it was a scrapbook. In yours, it could be something else, but finding that focusing lens is going to be crucial in having a well thought out, well connected type D essay. With that in mind, let's go over some practical advice. So I think the type B and the type D, those can be a lot harder to write than a narrative structure, because a narrative structure, like I've gone over, is a cause and effect relationship, right? You have a timeline of events and you're simply conveying that timeline of events in a very interesting and engaging way. Whereas a type B and more so a type D essay is much more open-ended, where you're like, where you may have an end goal or you may not even have an end goal, with regards to a type D essay, and you're basically trying to craft a narrative, not in the sense of a step-by-step narrative, but craft a character, a persona of who you are through illustrating these examples or events throughout your life, connecting them through some kind of connective thread, with the type B being with a career, type D being some other kind of framing lens. Now, the next piece of practical advice, it applies to everything that we're going over, but specifically with these, but more so with these kind of harder essays to write, is that you've got to trust Rashawn. She has read probably hundreds of essays, and so she knows what works. She knows the common pitfalls that you can fall into as you write these essays. She's advised students to avoid these pitfalls, and so a way you can avoid these pitfalls and achieve success is to make sure that you are listening. Oh yes, thank you. And yes, to the people who are advising you, right? So apparently you also have Donna and Takmina. Again, excuse me if I pronounced that incorrectly, right? So definitely, yes, absolutely listen to the people who are advising you, not just Roshan, right? These people know what they are talking about. They've done this for a significant amount of time. They have experience, and so don't brush them off. I told this story in the last session, and I think it's an important story to kind of bring this home. I remember the first year I did speech and debate, I wrote a speech on something that I was very passionate about at the time. And I still am passionate about this one topic, but it was not a topic that was well suited for the environment of debate to make it competitively successful. So although I was talking about something that I cared about, my speech wasn't all that competitively successful, and that was demoralizing in many ways. And by the end of the year, because we give some of these same speeches every time, depending on the event, I won't get into that right now, but towards the end of the year, it became very demoralizing to just give up and give that speech, because it was just like, all right, I know I'm not going to do well with this speech, but I have to give this speech anyways. And so you might get into the same pitfall with an essay where you're looking at it and you're saying, I don't like this essay and I'm not confident about it. And that might, that's going to be a result of probably many things. First off, not brainstorming, not outlining, but it could also absolutely be because you're not trusting the people whose job it is to kind of help you write these essays. Again, they'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but these people will be able to point you in the right direction. All right, now with that in mind, what I want us to do is to spend the rest of the time, and I know we finished relatively almost within an hour, which is fantastic. But what I want you to do for the next, at least 15 minutes is, we talked about A and C, so maybe you've already got your format in your mind. You know what you're going to be talking about, what that looks like. Then work on that, right? Because this is a time for you to work on something that is going to be beneficial, and ask I and Rashawn a question of what you have. But if you aren't an A or C type writer, then what I want you to do is I want you to categorize yourself into either a type B person or a type D person, and then work through this kind of format. So if you're a type B person, again, have those 3 columns on a sheet of paper. Writing it out is going to be very, very beneficial because you've got it in front of your eyes. And it's going to allow you to think through these ideas a lot easier than it is just kind of having them in your head or typing them on a keyboard or doing all those different kinds of things. work your way through this format and see, what struggles am I having with? What questions do I have? And do the same thing with the type D. If you're struggling to find a framing device, um, ask Rashawn and I a question so that we can help you out with that framing device. So again, we'll take the next at least 10 to 15 minutes with you guys just thinking through some of these examples so that you can have some experience with that. And then if you see anything that you're struggling with, to kind of ask those questions in the chat, and so that we can answer those questions as well. Feel free. Oh, yeah. So one question is, how much time should we spend on essays if we apply for 10 plus universities? So, um, okay, yes, good question. So, all right, um, so I'll answer the first question, right? So if you apply for 10 plus universities, the thing is that first off, that's a lot of universities, because I think I applied for a very similar number, and it was a lot of work. And I will say that I think many of my essays suffered because I applied for so many. But what I will say is that you need to spend as much time on your essays, um, as much time as you need, right? So if you can write an essay, a good essay, quickly, then you probably won't need to spend as much time as somebody else. But what I will say is that you need to be revising your essays. So don't write an essay in a day and then, I mean, now if you get to that point, sometimes that happens and, whatever. But that should be the last thing that should happen. You should spend, you know, weeks, if not months ahead of time, planning out these essays, writing these essays, thinking through these essays, having people read over these essays, give you advice on these essays. And I would say revising is going to be key. If you send in an essay without any revisions, that should be, you should not do that. Let's just put it that way, because you should spend time revising, because oftentimes our initial ideas, the initial way we kind of frame things might be detrimental, might not be as good. I know from my speech and debate experience, I remember every time that I would write a speech for my coach, I would always have to rewrite basically the entire speech. I mean, this was like a ritual. So I would go into writing my first draft knowing, all right, I know this is going to be torn apart by my coach, and I know that the speech is going to be way better for it. But I wrote that first draft. I spent time and energy in that first draft, even though I knew this draft is going to be torn apart by my coach, and I'm going to have to rewrite it, right? So there is no superficial amount of time that I can say to spend on this on writing your essay. So somebody asks, yes. So I will go into the values question first, and then I will go into, I see your questions, and so and then I see your questions, and I'm taking them as they are in the chat. So somebody asks, how many values should we cover? How much is too much? So again, And you know, I hate to not be able to just give you an answer to some of these questions, but many of them are what works best for your specific essay. Because if we go back, I'm going to change this slide for just 1 second. I'll come right back to it. If we look at, for example, the scrapbook essay, if we look at the examples, I mean, she gives an example essentially in every sentence, starting with this third sentence and going all at with her third and fourth paragraph, right? So she gives an example with every sentence. Well, that works because of the nature of her essay is focused around a scrapbook. And so there are snippets, and so it very much works with that essay. Now, that probably won't work with many other essays because you don't want to give just cursory details on many of these things unless, again, it fits the kind of essay and what you're going for in your essay. There's another essay. It's entitled "The Punk Rock Anti-Nihilist Philosopher," and basically what he talks about are these 3 life lessons that he gained. And in that essay, really there are 3 with those lessons. There are 3 key values that he hones in on that he gained through these lessons. So in that case, there are maybe 3 primary examples that he uses, 3 primary events, and with those events is accompanied with one prime value. There might be other values that you can kind of find implicitly, but there are those 3 key values in an essay that deals with, you know, the top 3 lessons of his life, right? So with regards to how many values should we cover, do as many as what works. Now, what I will say, in addition to what I've already said on that, is that what is the most important in a college essay is that you show, don't tell. And what I mean by that is that you can tell us what your values are, but you need to be able to provide concrete examples of you embodying those values. So if you know, you say, well, I am curious, I am hardworking, I am responsible, I am this, I am that, I am this, and this, and then you give one example of all of these, that's going to look like you're just stringing something together because you haven't thought through what these things are, right? So it's going to be a balanced game. I mean, it really is. It's going to be a balanced game. And it's going to require conscious reflection on these things, but that's one way to think about it. Yes, what it means to look for a contradiction, and a contradiction is just 2 things that are, and of course, this is not like a logical contradiction because that's different, but just for the purposes of this, think about 2 things that are in conflict within your own life. 2 things that are in conflict. It could be 2 ideas, 2 characteristics of yourself, maybe a conflict that is kind of waging because of 2 things outside of your control. Think about contradictions or conflicts that are occurring mentally with you as you are navigating your life. And so that's why I said the idea of navigating, you know, my Hungarian, Romanian background and culture with my American culture, right? So there are things that I have to make sure that I do with my family, or that I do with my family, that I won't do with my friends. And so that might be a conflict where these 2 things might be in conflict. Now, I would say that you know, I've reconciled that, and like there really is no conflict, but something that might seemingly there might seemingly be a conflict. Right. So this is a good question as well. So the types of so somebody asks, what is the right? And I think Rashawn kind of addressed it as well. Yes. And so you can. So with regards, somebody asked. Um, so these types of essays are applicable to the Common App essay, but what about the supplementary ones as well? And I would say that these are absolutely frameworks and ideas that you can use throughout all of your essays. Because when you when a school asks, why do you want to come to this university, and I've told the story before and I'll tell it again. I was advising a student a couple of years ago, and she got into a very good university. And the question was, why do you want to go to this university? And she used the example of a chai tea. And as you know, a chai tea is black tea brewed in milk with some different spices put on top. And so basically what she did with this, and this was, I'm not sure if she had the language of an essence object or she thought of it in that way. But that was basically what it was. It was an essence object that she used to kind of explain why she wants to go to this specific university. And so she talked about how the black tea was the base of the entire college experience. And so for her, that was the educational value of simply going to that university. That was the base of the chai tea and the base of her educational and university experience. But there was also the cream or the milk in the chai tea that, you know, gives it extra flavor and enhances what the chai tea and makes the chai tea a chai tea. And there she talked about, I forget exactly what, but I think it might have been, you know, maybe some of the professors that she had, or some of the extracurricular activities, some of the programs that they had at this university that kind of set the university apart. And so the next part, of course, of the chai tea is the, you know, ginger and the spices that are put on top of the chai tea. And for that, she said these spices were the professors at this university. And she went into specific detail about who these professors were, what some of the ideas they had written about in the past, and why she was excited to take them. And so it was using an essence object, maybe you could even say in somewhat in the same format as potentially a type D format, where you say the framing lens is a chai tea. Here are the key aspects of a chai tea that embody these values. The black tea, base of the experience. Cream or milk enhances the experience. And the ginger and spices puts the experience over the top, right? So those are the key values it embodies. And then the connection here is that the educational experience overall of the university is the base of my experience at this university. Then we have these extra programs that enhance the flavor of the university. And then we have these professors who put the university over the top because of the insights that they have. And then these specific connections and connections to the chai tea might be accompanied with some of these, like an insight. So for example, let's say, I think a part of this essay, she talked about how the base, I think when she specifically talked about looking at these professors, she talked about the specific idea and how important this idea was to a specific professor that she's excited to take at her university. And she says, and then she talks about at the very end of that section how excited she is to put that idea into practice into her own career. And so that's the insight that you might get from that section of her essay, is that the ginger and spice is like these professors who put the experience over the top, and she can't, and she's excited, or the so what moment is she's going to put those into practice into her own life. So I hope that makes sense. That was kind of long drawn out, but we can see how these structures, and I'm not sure if she had a, you know, a type A, B, C, D structure that she was familiar with at the time, but in some ways it fit into this structure, which is pretty amazing because she might not have had this structure to begin with, right? So there are ways that you can modify these structures in order to fit the needs of the specific essay that you are addressing. But fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. And really, all of these questions have been really, really good. Of course, it's my pleasure. Thank you for coming, and thank you for showing interest in the issue. And of course, we are still in the time of, feel free to spend some more time conscious reflecting um, on what you have. And if you have any, yeah, absolutely. Yes. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask them.
Looks like we have no questions left.
Mhm. Yep.
So maybe we can just end this meeting.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
We'll
Yeah.
see. I will see you in like half an hour.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good. See you in half an hour.
Yeah.